If you're a subscriber, you know that Glacier is my favorite park. I've been visiting it since 1994. I've made several comprehensive guides that show you why I love this place. And it's fair to say that I know it pretty well. This is the 6th year in a row that I'm providing the latest info to help you plan your trip to my favorite park. And if you're planning on staying in the park, you really need to start planning for 2026. Almost all of the rooms for 2025 are already sold out. Now, if you're camping or planning on staying outside the park, then now is a great time to plan for 2025. I'm going to assume you already know something about the place, but haven't yet dedicated an hour or more to watch one of my comprehensive guides. At least not yet. But if you had, I've added chapter marks so you can skip over the stuff you already know. But don't skip the vehicle reservation section, as those rules have changed in 2025. Let's start with the basics. It's a huge park in northwest Montana with only one road across it, the magnificent Going to the Sun Road. The glaciers, waterfalls, and sights along it are the main reason many people come here. But there's much more to Glacier than just the beauty along this magnificent road. There are also mountain lakes, waterfalls, broad valleys, and of course, glaciers. You can see them all in a boat, on a horse, and of course on foot, which is my favorite. The over 700 miles of trails make Glacier the Hikers National Park. There are trails for everyone, even if you're in a wheelchair. If you're a backpacker, Glacier has great multi-day hikes, but you'll have to reserve a backcountry permit for those. Most of you have heard of the Appalachian Trail, but did you know there's also a Continental Divide Trail? The 3,100-mile trail begins in Mexico and goes all the way to Glacier National Park and then on to Canada. A few of my favorite trails in Glacier are actually a part of this monster trail. Boat tours are available in most parts of the park, and there's one in Canada's Waterton Lakes Park too. I've been on all of them, and they're a nice way to relax after a long hike, or perhaps on a day when you need to let the blisters heal a bit. And yes, you can bring your own canoe, kayak, or paddleboard, but it must be inspected before you put it in the water. They correctly want to make sure that the invasive zebra mussel doesn't infest these lakes. And there's waterfalls pretty much everywhere. The historic lodges aren't bad either, and they're in spectacular places. And oh yeah, others come here to see wildlife, like bighorn, moose, and in particular, bears, including grizzlies, which can be a bit temperamental if you encounter one, so don't skip the bear safety section. And it's really several parks in one, as there are several activity areas. They are all connected by hiking trails, but not directly by roads. Getting from one area to another can take hours. In 2024, over 3 million people visited the park, and most of them entered at the west entrance to the Sun Road. For the past few years, the Park Service has tried to limit parking and congestion issues by requiring a vehicle reservation to enter the park during the peak season. Every year they tweak it a little bit, and 2025 is no different. This year, during the busy season, between the hours of 7 a.m., not 6 a.m. like last year, but between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m., you need a timed vehicle reservation to drive the Sun Road past the APCAR area. And yes, this year they have a timestamp. In the past, they were good for the whole day. Today, they are only good for a 2 to 3 hour window that is displayed on your reservation. If you're not in line during your time block, you'll have to wait till 3 p.m. to enter the park. Once you're in the park, you can stay as long as you want.
I couldn't get a ticket, so I didn't get it. Oh, then take a right here, sir. Follow the signs.
And if you've driven across the Sun Road from the east side, if you pass the APCAR checkpoint, you'll have to wait till after 3 p.m. to head back on the Sun Road. The only other place you need a vehicle reservation in 2025 is for the North Fork Road. And please remember, you will not be allowed in outside the time window of your reservation. The $2 reservation must be purchased from the recreation.gov website up to 120 days in advance. If you can't get one of these advanced reservations, each evening at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, during the busy season, a certain number of reservations are released for the following day on the recreation.gov site. But remember, if you're in the park and trying to get one of these, there is limited connectivity in the park. the only places you're likely to get a signal is in the town site of Apgar and in the in-park hotel lobbies. Though I'd test it first. And yes, it's a little complicated. But the good news is, in 2025, you don't need a vehicle reservation anywhere on the east side. But there is some bad news if you're a fan of the trails in the Mini Glacier area, like I am. Unless you're staying at the Mini Glacier Hotel, have booked a boat ride on Swiftcurrent Lake, or Lake Josephine, or a trail ride, you cannot drive into the Mini Glacier area this year. This is a big change, as it's where most of my favorite trails are. It turns out they're doing extensive construction in the Swiftcurrent Motor Inn area, and its parking lot is closed through all of 2025 through May of 2026. So to hike my favorite trails this year, you will need a timed reservation for a hiker shuttle service. And they've never done this before. They're still working out all the details, so check with the park website for updates. You'll purchase the tickets on the recreation.gov website starting June 24th. And the shuttles will only run from July 1st to September 21st. It's not clear where you're going to be picked up, but they will drop you off at the Mini Glacier Hotel parking lot, which will add up to a mile each way to your hike. Again, check back to the website for details if you're planning on doing these beautiful hikes in Mini Glacier. It's true that visiting Glacier isn't quite as easy as it used to be, but I assure you it's worth it. Because there are great places throughout the park, but it can take a while to get from one park area to another. So it's best to stay close to where you want to play. If you're staying outside the park, please be aware of the travel times. The more popular areas have their own lodges and dining opportunities that include the historic hotels, as well as cozier and more affordable motor inns and cabins. And in the remote places, you can get a permit for backcountry camping. Since most people enter the park from the west side, I'll talk about the Lake McDonald area first. The town of Apgar is just inside the park boundary, but you can drive to it without a reservation. It has a visitor center, which is where you can board an express hiker shuttle to Logan Pass every morning. It also has places to stay, as well as things to eat, and of course, things to buy and bring home. You can also rent kayaks, e-bikes, and even pepper spray here. And it's home to one of Glacier's classic views, Lake McDonald. The rest of the Lake McDonald area is just past the Vehicle Reservation checkpoint on the Going to the Sun Road. And it's here that you'll find the Trail of the Cedars, which is a short wheelchair-accessible boardwalk through an old-growth cedar forest. At the far end, there's a really nice waterfall. Most of the trails on this side of the park are below the tree line, so on a hot summer day, this is a pretty good place to be. One of the park's famous lodges is at the east end of Lake McDonald. It's the Lake McDonald Lodge. And the boat tour begins just behind it. The park is so big that it has several climate zones and ecosystems. And the Sun Road takes you to a few of them. Lake McDonald is on the east side, where the elevation is only about 3,000 feet. This is the area called the Loop. Logan Pass is the highest point, with an elevation of about 6,400 feet. It's a popular spot with a visitor center and many trails. Its parking lot is often full by 7:30 in the morning, but parking gets a bit easier late in the afternoon. The views on the east side of the pass are some of my favorite. Lunch Creek is a great photo spot, and there are several trailheads along the route. A little further down, there's a hiker shuttle stop and a pullout with a view of the biggest glacier in the park, Jackson Glacier. This pullout and several others have, well, I'll be polite and call them comfort stations. And they tend to be pretty well maintained and not overly fragrant. There are larger parking lots and shuttle stops at the popular viewpoints and hiking areas. And then you enter an area of the park that burned fairly recently. Fire is a natural part of the forest life cycle, and since it's been a few years, you can really see how a forest renews itself. And be sure to stop at the Wild Goose Island viewpoint. It's probably my favorite view in the park. The road flattens out near Rising Sun and St. Mary, where this side of the road is about 2,000 feet higher than the west side at about 5,000 feet. At the far eastern edge of the Sun Road, you'll find the Rising Sun Motor Inn and cabins. There's also a restaurant here. And just outside the park, in the town of St. Mary, there's a large hotel, some expensive cottages to rent, and even a gas station. It's the only one in the area. There's also a fast service restaurant, and on a hot day, I highly recommend its ice cream selection. Well, now that we've crossed the Sun Road, I'm going to talk about the areas on the east side of the park. Two Medicine is in the southeast corner of the park, and many will tell you that the best trails are here. 100 years ago, this is where train passengers started their glacier experience. And some still get here by rail. The train station is a 70-mile drive from Apgar on the west side via Highway 2, and about a 45-minute drive from St. Mary. The trails at Two Medicine Lake are a 15-minute drive away. The Many Glacier area is 30 to 40 minutes from the east end of the Sun Road and the town of St. Mary. It's about 75 minutes from East Glacier. If you have your passport, you can also explore the adjacent Waterton Lakes National Park in Canada. Together, these parks are the first international peace park. The Prince of Wales Hotel, which is in a spectacular spot, is just about an hour from the east end of the Sun Road. While the park is open 24/7 every day, the famous Going to the Sun Road is only fully open when the weather allows, which is usually from late June through mid-September or maybe mid-October. It really depends on the weather. It's a beautiful drive in a car, on a red bus, or even on a bicycle, which have become very popular, in part because you can also rent an e-bike here. To make the most of your time in the park, it's best to stay in it. I've made a video that describes each of the options, but here's the short version. The historic lodges are the biggest. You might even say the grandest. Lake McDonald Lodge is on the west side. Glacier Park Lodge is in the southeast corner of the park near Two Medicine. And my favorite, which is sadly too pricey for me these days, is in Many Glacier. And in 2025, it's the only place to stay in this popular hiking area because my favorite place to stay in the park, the Swiftcurrent Motor Inn, which is just down the road, is closed for extensive renovations of its water system and other infrastructure. Its parking lot is also closed, which is going to be a problem for those hiking its popular trails. They're some of the best in the park. The big hotels also have a few dining options, ranging from fancy to casual. They also have camp stores with everything from trail foods to bear spray. The Lake McDonald area has smaller motels and cabins that are more affordable. The town of East Glacier also has small private motels. On the east side of the Sun Road, the Rising Sun Motor Inn has motel-style rooms and cabins, as well as a casual diner and a camp store. There are also two very remote places to stay in the park. They're called backcountry chalets. And you can't drive there. You have to hike to them or rent a horse. They only have a few rooms each, and you have to pack out what you pack in. But staying there is very special, and the rooms are very hard to come by. All the rooms in the park sell out very quickly. As I'm writing this in January, most of the rooms for 2025 are already booked, so you need to plan ahead. But booking a room can be kind of tricky because 3 different companies manage the properties and book the rooms. And it gets even more confusing because some of these companies have other properties that have similar sounding names. You may think you're booking a room inside the park, when in fact you're not. So be sure you're calling the correct place and booking a room in the correct hotel. The bigger hotels and some of the others can be reserved up to 13 months in advance. And again, these rooms tend to go quickly. One of the companies books many of the smaller properties in the park, and they're already booking rooms for 2026. So I guess what I'm saying is, to go to Glacier, you really need to plan ahead. But if you can't do that, or those rooms are just too expensive, it's much easier, and in most cases cheaper, to get a room outside the park, particularly in the towns west of the park, But remember, if you're staying in one of those, you'll need a timed vehicle reservation to get into the park, at least during the busy season between the hours of 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. There aren't nearly as many rooms east of the park. That land is controlled by the Blackfeet Nation, and they're just not into hotels. But there is one in the town of St. Mary, which is at the east end of the Going to the Sun Road. Of course, you don't have to stay in a hotel. The park has many campgrounds. If you're camping in an RV or a tent, you should become familiar with the park's camping page. It includes links on information to campgrounds that take reservations, and another link to a few of the smaller ones that are only available on a first-come, first-served basis. Like every other accommodation in the park, the reservations go quickly. And if you want to get one of the first-come, first-served spaces, you better get there early. For more lodging information, check out the park's website, or better yet, take a look at my Glacier lodging video. It includes a detailed tour of each of the hotels in the park, as well as the rooms in its motor inns and cabins. I even give you a detailed look at my favorite place to stay outside the park. Now it's time to learn more about the free hiker shuttles and guided red bus and other tours, which are not free. During the busy season, the park offers a free shuttle service along the Going to the Sun Road from July 1st through Labor Day, and based on demand, it may be extended through mid-September. There are two types of shuttles. There's an express service from either side of the Sun Road, and there are shuttles that make several stops along the way. The 12 to 28 passenger buses come along every 15 to 30 minutes. If one is full, you'll have to wait for the next one. You board the West Side Express shuttles at the Apgar Visitor Center. They only run from 7 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. The East Side pickup point is the St. Mary Visitor Center, and they only run from 8 to 8:45 a.m. There are stops for the full shuttle service all along the Sun Road, and they run from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day of the season. Each shuttle has a route that covers roughly 1/4 of the Sun Road, so it will take 4 shuttles to go from one side to the other. And to be on the safe side, don't assume there will be space on the 7 p.m. shuttle, which of course is the last one. If it's full, there will not be another one until morning. Before the Sun Road is fully open, there's another service called the Hiker Biker Shuttle. It's offered only from the west end of the Sun Road, and it's available on weekends from May 11th through June 30th, or until the Sun Road is fully open, whichever comes first. It'll take you and your bicycle up to Logan Pass, so gravity can help you descend the 3,000 feet. Since the 1930s, park tours have been available in these red buses. There are half-day and full-day tours for the most popular places in the park, and the drivers are trained to tell you about the park as you drive along. They are operated by a third-party vendor and can cost over $100. You can purchase a tour in advance from the vendor's website. And as an added bonus, if your tour starts in the Apgar area, your paid tour also includes one of those hard-to-get vehicle reservations for the Apgar area for that day. If your tour starts outside the park, you still have to buy a park pass. The vendor produced a nice video with some more information.
There are multiple tours that run from all of our properties, Apgar, Rising Sun, Mini Glacier Hotel, and they go all around the park.
Our most popular tour is going to be our Western or Eastern Alpine. It's kind of like a half-day tour, and you're getting that one side of the Continental Divide, either from the east side or from the west side. And then we do have tours that go through the entire day. So you might start all the way on the west entrance and go all the way to the farthest part of Mini Glacier and back, with a lunch hour included.
I think if you're going to take the Going to the Sun Road for the first time, it's more enjoyable to ride rather than to drive.
Red Bus is going to set itself apart because you've got a driver with a bunch of training on geology, history, the park, everything that has happened from the beginning. And your driver's going to tell you the best pictures to take and all those kind of tidbits that help enhance the experience rather than just driving in your own car. Like, this feels really special. This feels like a very historic thing to be a part of. But then also just people come here, it's their first time, and you get to show the park to them. That's like just chilling. That's like the coolest part, just seeing everybody light up.
And there's one more tour company. The east side of the park is on Blackfeet tribal land. The relationship's kind of complicated. The tribe actually has control over its own borders. They lease the land to the U.S. government. And to learn more about this, you might want to book one of the Blackfeet tours. They offer full and half-day narrated tours from the Blackfeet perspective. Before hitting a trail or even driving the Sun Road, you need to know what to do if you encounter wildlife, and a bear in particular. There are both black bears, like this one, and grizzlies, like this one, in the park. But there's also moose, goats, bighorn, and the odd mountain lion. Once there was even a porcupine under my Swiftcurrent cabin. And you gotta remember that this park is their home. And you never know how a wild animal is going to defend it. Never approach any of these wild animals. Even if you're not going to hike a trail, you need to read the park's info on bear safety. For legal reasons, I can't really describe it here. All I'm going to say is that it's very important for you to know how to be safe out here. I've hiked hundreds of miles in the park, and I've never seen a bear near me.
Hey, bear.
But I always follow the rules. And rule number 1 is make noise. I have been close to goats and moose on trails, and even they can be dangerous. So please educate yourself, and maybe buy a can of bear spray when you get to the park, as it's not allowed on most airlines. But I know that many people come here just to see a bear. Those are usually people who haven't seen anybody mauled by one. But if you want to see one, you should know that bears and other animals like to drink in the lakes and streams in the early morning. This bear was not far from St. Mary Lake, along the Going to the Sun Road. And now let's talk about the trails. My other videos cover the popular trails in great detail. Here's just a little something to whet your appetite. If you're going to hike the trails, you should download the trail maps for each of the activity areas. And if you can't do that, 4 of the maps are available in a pack at ranger stations, and individually at the front desk of most of the park's lodges. The backs of the ranger maps have some useful safety trail information too. The trail distance information on the maps isn't quite as easy to understand as I wish it was, so you have to do some math to figure out how long a trail is. If you're online, you can scroll down below the map to see the total distance and some other info, like how hard they think the trail is. At the top of each map, there's a list of all the trails, along with the net elevation gain of each. By the way, I think the elevation info on these maps is more accurate than some of the other numbers you'll see on the website. Day hike trails are concentrated in 5 areas. The Lake McDonald area includes the Apgar town site. It's near the west entrance where most people enter the park, so it can be a bit crowded. There's lots to do here even without hitting a trail. But by the way, bikes and pets are not allowed on any of the park's trails. There's also a backcountry permit office here. The base elevation is the lowest in the park, and most trails are below the 6,900-foot tree line, so they're well shaded, which is handy on hot days. This is also the only place I know of in the park where you can rent a can of bear spray. It's about $10 a day. Normally a can will cost you about $50. Massive fires in 2017 and 2018 burned about 30,000 acres in this area, creating dangerous conditions and early seasonal closures. And that's always a possibility later in the season. There is another west side activity area called North Fork. It's a dusty 30-minute-plus drive, some of which is on a single-track gravel road. It has lots of tree-lined trails, and some of them connect all the way over to another area called Goat Haunt. This is a remote part of the park, and there's not a lot of parking. There are Finger Lakes, forests, and Pole Bridge Mercantile, and its remarkably good off-grid bakery. Goat Haunt can only be accessed from a trail or through Canada's Waterton Lakes National Park, which is Glacier's sister park. If you download the entire map of Glacier, well, Waterton is attached to it. There's a little section above the border, and that's Waterton Lakes National Park. It has some great trails like Crip Lake, which is spectacular. And of course, you'll need a passport to go there. And the view from the Prince of Wales Hotel? Well, that's pretty good too. The St. Mary map includes trails along the east side of the Sun Road and at Logan Pass. Here you'll find easy access to waterfalls near the Sun Road, hikes to high mountain passes, and the popular trails at Logan Pass. Two Medicine is in the southeast part of the park. From the time the park opened in 1910 until the Going to the Sun Road was completed in 1932, Most park visitors arrive by train 10 minutes from Two Medicine in the nearby town of East Glacier, which is the home of the historic Glacier Park Lodge. The Two Medicine parking lot is small, and when it's full, you're turned away. But that makes Two Medicine less crowded than other areas. And some say the best trails in the park are here, like the Dawson Pass to Potemkin Pass trail. If you take the boat, it's a 12-mile loop with a lot of elevation gain, but also some of the best views in the park. There are also short, easy trails, one's less than a half-mile long, to a waterfall. And there's also boat tours and a campground. Many Glacier is in the northeast part of the park, which is my favorite. It's about a 40-minute drive from the east entrance of the Sun Road, and the view from the famous Mini Glacier Hotel is one of the best in the park. But remember that in 2025, the Swiftcurrent Motor Inn, its campground, and its parking lot are closed for 2025. So to hike in this area, you have to take that special shuttle that'll drop you off at the Mini Glacier Hotel. And that'll add up to a mile each way for many hikes. But this is where most of my favorite trails are, both easy ones and hard, including my favorite, the Grinnell Glacier Trail. It ends at the foot of a receding glacier. Mini Glacier also has activities for non-hikers, or for those who need a rest day, like taking a boat tour, or riding a horse. Because here is one of the two places in the park where a vendor offers trail rides. The other is near Lake McDonald. But here you can ride a horse to Cracker Lake. It's one of the bluest in the park. Most day hike trails are out and back. But there are also some loop trails and some one-way trails that require transportation back to the trailhead. A free shuttle can help with that. Well, that's the day hiking areas. You can also do multi-day backcountry treks with a permit. And I hope that you'll tell me about them in the comments. Let's talk about trip planning. A plan is important, but keep in mind that Glacier is not a theme park. Nature's plans may not coincide with yours. So first, plan for flexibility. Bear activity can close trails and campgrounds. Weather is unpredictable and can change quickly in the mountains. Forest fires can utterly ruin your plans. In recent years, my annual trip has been canceled twice because much of the park was on fire. And smoke from fires, even if they're hundreds of miles away, can make hiking and even breathing difficult, and for some, dangerous. So when planning a week to 10-day trip, I plan for at least one bad weather day. Your plans will also depend on if you're staying on the east or west side. Remember, it takes 2 to 3 hours to cross the park on the Sun Road. Keep in mind that those who are in really good shape have many more options when it comes to doing trails. I prefer 9 to 10-day trips, but most people stay for less than a week. So the itinerary I'm about to describe is for a 7-day stay. Let's say you arrive in the afternoon. So on day 1, get to know the area. Read over the park info they give you when you enter the park, and ask a ranger or hotel staff if any of the trails are closed. Ask where there have been wildlife sightings. Then explore your local area. Ask other visitors what they've done that they really enjoyed. And take a short walk or hike just to see how the altitude is affecting you. Remember, the east side elevation is about 5,000 feet, and that's about 2,000 feet higher than it is on the west side near Lake McDonald. For dinner, or perhaps after dinner, visit one of the park's historic hotels, even if you're not staying at one. Many areas have ranger talks each night near a campground or in a hotel ballroom. In Mini Glacier, a ranger sets up a spotting scope in the Swiftcurrent parking lot each evening. You may not be lucky enough to see a bear, but there's almost always something on one of the mountain ridges. And of course, you don't have to do all of these things on the first night. You've got 6 more. Whatever you do, don't just hang around in your room. It's far too beautiful out here. Rooms are for sleeping and writing in your journal. That's how I get the base material for these scripts. Unless I get to the park really early on day 1, I use my first full day in the park, day 2, to get used to the altitude and maybe do a short hike, but most importantly, that's the day I take a bunch of pictures. Drive to Going to the Sun Road, or take a bus tour to another area of the park that you haven't seen. And if you're lucky enough to get a parking place at Logan Pass, stop and look around. You never know what you might see or photograph. But please remember, these are wild animals. Don't try to take a selfie with them. If you feel up to it, take an hour or so to hike out to my favorite lunch spot, with its great view of Heaven's Peak and the valley below. On the Sun Road, when you come to Sunriff Gorge, stop and take a look at the gorge, and maybe walk down to Bering Falls. It's not far. And don't miss one of my favorite photo ops in the park, Wild Goose Island Viewpoint. It's just a few steps from the Sun Road. Glacier is a great place for photographers and Instagrammers. And of course, remember that the east side of the park is lit by the sun in the morning, and the west side of the park is lit in the afternoon. And also remember, there is no phone service. But for some of us, maybe it's a good thing that there's no cell coverage in the park. By day 3, it's time to take a real hike, one of my must-do hikes. For first-time visitors who are physically fit, here is a list of my must-do hikes. Number 1, and my favorite hike in Glacier National Park, it's the Grinnell Glacier Trail. For many, this is a tough day, but it's one you will never forget. Day 4. If you're tired and sore, maybe with a blister or two, you may want a day that doesn't have quite as much up as the Grinnell Glacier Trail. The Highline Trail out to my little lunch spot, all the way to Granite Park and down to the Loop, has less than 1,000 feet of up. And my favorite longish flat trail is Bullhead Lake in Many Glacier. By day 5, you might be ready for an easier hike. If you're on the west side, you should definitely try the Trail of the Cedars. It's boarded and only a couple of miles long, with a nice payoff at the end. After an easy day, it's time for another tough hike. Like maybe the Tarbagan Tunnel, or if you're looking for a moderate hike, how about Iceberg Lake? If you're in Canada, try Crypt Lake. If you're in Two Medicine, try the Dawson to Potemkin Pass. On day 7, getaway day, get up before the sun to see Glacier at daybreak. I do this nearly every day to capture images and get time-lapse sunrises. Glacier looks incredible at dawn, and everyone should experience this at least once when they come to Glacier. If I don't have to leave until midday, I'll also try to do a short hike before I leave. The Falls hike from the Sun Road, the Trail of the Cedars on the west side, or maybe even a jaunt out to my lunch spot if I have to cross through the park. Basically, take in as much as possible. I haven't said too much about nighttime activities because, well, this is not a party park. The big lodges have fine dining and a bar, and unlike your room, it has a TV. The towns west of the park have many more options, but I'm usually asleep as soon as I'm done taking my notes. But if there is a clear sky, I highly recommend that you step outside and look up. The altitude and clear sky means a city dweller will see more stars than they've ever seen before. It's even better when there's no moon. The number of stars is incredible, as is the Milky Way. If you're really lucky, you may even see the Northern Lights. If you're a young couple, remember that the walls in these old hotels are very thin. And the sunsets, they're not bad either. So what do you do if the weather is bad? Well, first, come prepared. Bring Gore-Tex versions of everything from shoes to hat and gloves, and hike anyway. On one of my first trips to the park, I spent several hours on one rainy day just hanging out in the Many Glacier Hotel. The ever-changing view out the large-scale windows, and the warmth and smells of the fireplace made for a remarkably pleasant day. Well, for several hours anyway. And remember, the weather can be quite different on either side of the park. If it's raining on the side you're on, check with a ranger or hotel staff to see where it might not be raining. On more than one occasion, I've just driven to another area and done hikes over there. Forest fires are a bigger problem. Bear activity can also cause trails and campgrounds to be closed. Remember, this is not a theme park. Mother Nature is not your mom, and like your mom, she has no favorites. Okay, now let's start talking about getting here. I assume most of you will be flying in. I've been to the park 19 times, going back to 1994, and I tend to use the cheapest airport, which is rarely the nearest airport in nearby Kalispell. Few airlines fly into it and seats fill up quick. So I've only used it a couple of times. I did check on it in June of 2022, and the cheapest rental car in Kalispell was $262 a day. I decided to fly to Seattle to see some relatives before making the long drive to Montana. I've also flown into Great Falls, but my favorite place to fly into is Calgary. It's only a 3.5-hour drive to the east side of the park, and there's interesting sights along the way, like the head-smashed-in buffalo jump. It has the added advantage of being close to Canada's Banff National Park, and if there's forest fires or another calamity in Glacier, then you can just head up to the Canadian Rockies, though it's very crowded and hard to get reservations in too. Before I wrap this up, I need to say something about the glaciers. Yes, they are shrinking, as they have been since the end of the Little Ice Age in the 1850s. But they're not disappearing as fast as some thought. In 1997, I hiked up to Grinnell Glacier with Al Gore's group. Then in the early 1900s, media reports indicated that all the glaciers in the park would be gone by 2020. Well, the glaciers are still here. And the Park Service had to remove signs like this one. But I've been coming to the park long enough to see that there have been changes. I shot this standard def video of Grinnell Glacier in 1995. It was much bigger then, and there was even an ice cave. Only a few of the 26 glaciers in the park are easily visible. You can see Jackson Glacier from the Sun Road, and it is the biggest in the park. One of the smaller ones is Pegan Glacier, and it's the only glacier in the park that apparently isn't shrinking, perhaps because it's in a sun shadow. So yes, the glaciers are shrinking, but their death has been greatly exaggerated. Many of them will likely disappear into the park's streams and rivers, but they've stopped trying to predict when that day will come. Glacier has become a victim of its own success. Crowds have made travel, and especially parking, a big problem. And you can see the parking lot status on the website. And remember, you can also find road status information on the website. During the busy season, the best way to enjoy the park is to start early. Popular parking areas are often full by 7:30 in the morning. And trailhead parking also fills up early, and you will get a ticket if you park where you're not supposed to. Another way to avoid the crowds is to avoid the busy season. I've made a recent trip in early June and another in early October. The weather wasn't great on the June trip, and many of the trails were closed due to snow and flooding. But there was still plenty to see. I had never seen Lake McDonald flooded, or McDonald Creek raging. The rain has other benefits too. The long drive to the east side was worth it, and it's always fun to see a bear. I got lucky on my October trip. I was there for peak fall color. Sure, there were a couple of cold mornings, but there were more pleasant afternoons. By now, I hope you understand why Glacier is my favorite park. And if you don't, check out one of my other video travel guides. I bet they'll convince you. For many, Glacier is a once-in-a-lifetime trip. But for me, and countless others, we keep coming back. Because you just can't experience everything this park has to offer on one trip. But I hope this video helps you plan yours. Please give it a like and subscribe. This channel is dedicated to helping you explore the West, because it's big. Thanks for watching, and come on out to Glacier, my favorite national park. And I think you'll agree, this place is special.